Hi, everyone. Good morning. The meeting, sorry for the technical difficulties. We're now live streamed, and I'm just going to stop my video and mute myself and just run it in the background. So if anyone needs anything, just let me know.
Thanks, Madison. Okay, looks like we're ready to get going here. Sorry for the brief delay. We sent out the agenda earlier. I realized that, Peter, you're normally the chair, so we should probably look at whether or not you're going to continue, or if there's others that are interested. Are you interested in continuing as the chair?
I'm happy to give it up at any time. I think I've been on for at least 3 terms.
Yeah, and you've done a great job. So I'll just open up the floor to see if there's anybody else that's interested. And if not, we might have you carry on. Going once, going twice. Okay, I don't see anybody else volunteering. So do you want to carry on, Peter?
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. I see a whole bunch of new faces. Some of them I have an idea as to what their capacity is, but some of them I don't. The way the screen shows up right now, I can't see everybody at one time. I don't know if there's a way of doing that. I'm not a technical.
I can give you an idea as to who we've got online right now from the committee. So first off, we have Chris Tenaglia.
Okay, and Chris is representing.
Chris, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Catherine. I'm with Greenstone Engineering and Lazar Brothers, so I'm here representing as a public participant.
Thanks. Okay, and then we've also got Ben Muncaster online. Ben, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hey everyone, my name is Ben Muncaster. I work for Rocco, and I'm just a member of the public committee member.
Thanks for joining us. Then we also have David McLaughlin.
Morning, everyone. Dave McLaughlin, and I work with PUC Services in the Water Distribution Department. I'm also just a public participant.
Okay. And then we have a new counselor on the line here as well for this term. Ron Zagordo, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me right now.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I'm Ron Zagordo. I'm Ward 3 counselor. This is my first term, just newly elected, and just want to throw out there, Mr. McClarty there must have had a great influence on me, because here I am on the environmental committee, and he was my grade 9 science teacher. So he's had quite the influence on me, I guess. Hi, Peter.
Hey, hi, Ron. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Well, he's quite influential in the committee as well, so. Okay, just go through here. We have Jace Dominy from the Ministry of the Environment. Jace, did you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jace Dominy. I'm the environmental officer that is partially dealing with the area now. You will see Sarah Louchis on here as well, and she's the new environmental officer dealing with Sault Ste. Marie, and she can kind of introduce herself as well.
Okay, great. Hi, Sarah.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi, I'm Sarah Lauschus. I work with Jay Stomney in the Sault Ste. Marie office, and I'm like he said, a new environmental officer that probably eventually be taking over this area.
okay, great to have you. So I think that's
We'll
all
let,
public.
let Rick introduce Rob. We can put him on the agenda here. I've now got a view where I can see everybody on the screen.
Oh, great.
So I'm Rick Talvidi. Everyone, I work with AECOM, an local engineering firm. We've been intimately involved with the landfill site for over 20 years now in terms of planning and operational issues. And we work with our subconsultant Dylan to produce the annual reports. And I'll let Rob Kell introduce himself.
I'm Rob Kell. I work for Dylan. I've been working at the Sault Ste. Marie landfill for about 30 years. For the last 20 of them working alongside with AECOM.
Mike, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Blanchard. I'm the manager of waste management for the city, and I'm located right at the city landfill.
Thanks, Mike. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Catherine Tatto, Manager of Development and Environmental Engineering with the City of Sault Ste. Marie.
Okay, I think we've got everyone there, Catherine.
Yes.
Okay, for the new members of the committee, as I understand this, the committee itself is set up as a condition of the C of A for the landfill, and we're supposed to meet 3 times a year. This is the biggest meeting we'll have, and hopefully we'll be done by around 11, where we receive the reports from the from Dylan Consultant and also from AECOM, which Rick represents. My background, as Ron says, I was a teacher for 30 years in the city, and since retiring, I've been involved with this committee for at least 10 years. But living close to the landfill, I have a personal connection. I'm about a half mile away from it, and I'm on a municipal well, so I'm concerned with from a personal perspective. Lots of things have been happening. Probably the biggest thing that we're looking at is the landfill is reaching capacity, and if you've read the report, our expected lifespan now is down to 5 years, and so the landfill expansion will be on the top of the agenda of City Council for the next few years. Now that I've got a screen where I can see everybody's name at the same time, feel free to put your hand up at any time, or if I miss your hand, just interject. We're pretty informal here. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Catherine, were they sent out? I didn't see them.
Yeah, they were part of the agenda.
Okay, I didn't scroll down far enough then. I saw the agenda there. Really, it's more of a formality. Can you put that up on the screen, Catherine?
Right now, we've got it set up so we can transition right to the presentation, but we do have the email that went out to everybody. It was with the agenda package, so if you've got the agenda, it's the first thing after that.
Okay, I didn't scroll down far enough.
Yeah, it's a second page, so.
It's more or less formality, but I guess we should look at it. Make sure what we're approving. Down there. that basically summarizes, and it's similar to most of our meetings. So I need a motion to approve.
I'll move it, Peter.
Thanks, Mike. Seconder,
I'll second. Chris,
all in favor? Including me. Okay, thank you. Approved. Okay, moving on to the agenda itself then. Again, I can't see it at the same time. I'm going to break the, after the welcome, I forget who's up first.
So the second item was just review of the council reports, if there was any questions in relation to that, and then we transition into the presentations that Rick's got up on the screen here.
Catherine, you're going to handle the council reports then?
Yeah, if there's any questions, I don't know that there is, but our first meeting of every year, we typically circulate with the agenda any of the council reports that have happened since throughout the year. So there was a few of them that we attached. If there's any questions, a significant amount of the reports were from Public Works, so we've got Mike on the line to answer any of those questions. And if not, that's fine. We can go into the presentation, which is the main event today.
Okay. Now with the presentation, since Rob is a guest, we don't want to keep him around, so we'll let Rob go first.
I think Rick and Rob present together, so they've got sorted out the method by which they've got this going. So I'll leave it to them to decide.
Sure, I can kick things off here, Catherine and Peter. So again, Rick Talvidi with AECOM. And before I get into the reports, and given we do have some new members, I thought it would be worthwhile just to put up an aerial image of the landfill site itself, just to give the lay of the land as we talk through some of the content of the presentation. So what I do have up on the screen is, like I say, an aerial image of the landfill. Down at the bottom of my screen here is Fifth Line. And this here is the access road into the landfill site. We have our household hazardous waste depot here, together with our blower station, which is used to draw landfill gas from the landfill mass. So this is our landfill mass itself up here. This is where we're disposing of waste within the landfill footprint. You'll see these lines with these little dots on them. This is the landfill gas collection system. So the little dots are landfill vertical wells, or vertical wells within the landfill mass. And then there's a series of underground pipes, which are these black lines. And that landfill, or those pipes, will all come down to the blower station. So basically there's a large fan at the blower station, which puts a vacuum within the landfill mass where these pipes are, and draws landfill gas out of our landfill mass. And down at the blower station, there's a flare where we burn that landfill gas. If we look at some of the other things, we have our weigh scale here as you come into the landfill site, the public drop-off area, a series of an area here where we can deposit various recyclable materials and things that do not end up in the landfill. Off to the west, we have our wood waste drop-off area and tire drop-off area. And in the fall of 2022, we also established an interim leaf and yard waste drop-off area here. And In terms of leachate collection, we have a horizontal leachate collector that stretches along the south and southeast extent of the landfill site. And then along the western side, we have a series of 11 purge wells that are installed along the western boundary to collect leachate. So that just gives you a little bit of the lay of the land. Actually, if I move up to the north side of the site before I move on, there is our composting pad up here where we do compost leaf and yard waste. And we've been actively excavating earthen materials from the north portion of the site to use for landfill cover. And this is the area here where we are proposing to construct the biosolids and source separated organics processing facility. So that gives you a little bit of the lay of the land, and then we can lead right into the presentation. So what we want to do today is present to you the two reports that we prepare on an annual basis for the landfill site. There's two separate reports, one prepared by AECOM, which is called the Site Development and Operations Report. You see that in the background here. And basically that report provides information on the site operations over the course of the 2022 operating year. And then the other report is prepared by our subconsultant Dylan, and it's called the Monitoring Report, and it addresses groundwater and surface water quality within and around the landfill site, and also talks about landfill gas. So I'm going to lead right into the Site Development and Operations Report. And the first thing we want to highlight is that the site operations and the reporting requirements are dictated by what Peter referred to earlier, which is the site certificate of approval. It's basically the license that is issued by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks in terms of how the site is to be operated and reported on each year. And our site accepts domestic, commercial, and non-hazardous solid industrial waste and processed organic waste. And when we talk about the processed organic waste, we're really talking about sewage sludge that is generated at our 2 sewage treatment plants. We currently have a tipping fee of $77 per ton and a gate fee of $11 per visit for anything up to 300 kilograms. So when a residential customer visits the site, they pay $11 at the gate, as long as they're not bringing in more than 300 kilograms. If they bring in more than 300, then the tipping fee, the $77 per ton would kick in. And as I noted, the reporting period is the calendar year. So as I mentioned, in the northern portion of the site, we are continuing to excavate materials to be used as earth cover as we do our landfilling operations. I will, however, note that over the course of the past couple of years, there's been significant quantities of surplus earthen materials coming in from construction projects. So we do have a lot of surplus cover materials coming in that we are using for cover. So there hasn't been a lot of activity in terms of earth borrow because we have other materials coming in to supplement our cover needs. In the northwest portion of the site where I highlighted, we are going to be building the biosolids and source separated organics facility. There was a tree clearing contract that was completed last year in 2022 to make way for that new facility. And we are expecting to undertake our next contract, which will be an earth moving contract. It will be undertaken in the current construction season. And as I mentioned, we did establish, so what happened last year in September, Lemieux Composting announced that they were closing their facility. For those who don't know, Lemieux Composting had a leaf and yard waste depot on Black Road, and they announced in September that they were closing it. So the city quickly acted to establish their own leaf and yard waste depot at the landfill site to provide a means for residents to self-haul leaf and yard waste to the landfill, given that Lemieux is no longer accepting material. And the city has now established a more permanent leaf and yard waste depot at the landfill near the household hazardous waste depot. So the city also purchased 2 new 40-yard bins to replace some bins that were being used at the public drop-off area. We also drilled a new purge well on the western side of the site. It became operational in May of last year. And in December of last year, we installed a new groundwater monitoring well, well number 79, near the eastern boundary of the site to help monitor groundwater quality on the eastern side of the site. And that was really something that came about because of questions and concerns that were raised by the Environmental Monitoring Committee in the past. And I also just wanted to report that the city has been active in purchasing various properties around the site to enhance their buffer lands surrounding the site. And these buffer lands will also assist with what we hope to have in terms of an approved expanded landfill site in the future. So now the total landfill area is approximately 151 hectares when we consider all of the properties that make up the site. So there are a number of diversion activities that occur at the landfill site. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the household hazardous waste depot is a photo of the household hazardous waste depot. And then we have a couple of other photos up at the public waste drop-off where we have an electronics bin. We have normal collection of the typical blue box and yellow box materials in terms of containers and fibers that occur up there. As we mentioned, there's leaf and yard waste drop-off area at the public drop-off. So there's a little bit of a concrete compound where people can deposit their leaf and yard waste. That has now been established at the public drop-off. We had an interim area to the west of the public drop-off, and now there's an area right at the public drop-off for depositing leaf and yard waste. There are tires, an area for tires, batteries, propane tanks, metals and appliances. Wood waste is immediately to the west of the public drop-off area. As I mentioned, normal recyclables, fibers, and containers. And then we got waste electrical and electronic equipment in our household hazardous waste depot. Those are all materials that are diverted from the landfill. They don't end up in our landfill as waste. We do use some of the wood waste to supplement our cover materials in some cases, but in general, it's not considered a waste, but is used for a beneficial purpose to supplement our cover. When we talk about nuisance management, the 2 key items are litter control and odors. When we consider litter control, we are actively compacting the waste on a daily basis with the waste compactor, which binds the waste together to try and prevent windblown litter. The waste is covered on a regular basis, again, to prevent windblown litter. And then we also have, as you can see from the photos here, we've got portable screens, which are down in the lower right. And these portable screens are used around the active working face. And then we also have various areas of the landfill where permanent fencing is installed. And that fencing helps to catch any windblown litter so that we can pick it up easier. And then, of course, we have litter pickup programs, both manual litter collection and mechanical litter collection through an industrial vacuum. And then on the odor control side, one of the principal items that we have is the active landfill gas collection system. And again, that is that series of pipes that I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. And here in the top right corner is a picture of the flare where we burn that landfill gas. And we have our blower station, which, like I say, creates a vacuum within the landfill mass. So we draw the foul air out of the landfill mass and burn it at this flare. And then in terms of the other major item that produces odor is the sewage sludge that comes from the treatment plants. So before that sewage sludge leaves the treatment plants, there's an odor neutralizer that is applied to the trailers that contain that sewage sludge before it leaves the 2 sewage treatment plants and comes to the landfill. Once the sewage sludge is emptied at the landfill, they then apply another they reapply the odor neutralizer before those empty trailers are hauled back to the 2 sewage treatment plants. When they're in transit with the sewage sludge, there are impermeable tarps that are applied to the trailers to try and contain those odors. We do regular wash downs of those trailers. 36 of those washes were completed in 2022. And the intent of those washes is to remove some of the residual sewage sludge that's on those trailers that may create odors. And at the landfill site itself, we have a portable odor neutralizing mist sprayer. That's this photo down in the lower right-hand corner. So again, it would be used when we are tipping the biosolids in the working face. They will activate this mist sprayer to try and help neutralize the odors that may be emanating from those biosolids. And then also the city also recently established a standard operating procedure for the receipt and management of wastewater grit. So in addition to the sewage sludge that comes from the sewage treatment plants, we also have wastewater grit that comes periodically from those plants. And we established a standard operating procedure to make sure we know when that grit is going to be received at the landfill so it can be promptly disposed of and covered to try and mitigate any odors associated with that. So that's, and then if we look at, how effective things have been from an odor management perspective, this chart here is graphing the number of odor complaints we have seen since 2007 through to 2022. For a number of years, we were averaging about 10 complaints per year, which is right along this line here. We had the highest number of complaints in 2010. That was the year we were actually constructing the landfill gas collection system. So we had to dig into the waste to install those pipes that I talked about. And not surprisingly, it led to the highest number of complaints that we had, even though we had some significant mitigation strategies in place. But you will see in recent years, in 2021, we actually had no complaints registered. And in 2022, we only had 3 complaints. So there's been some positive results that we've seen in terms of the historical odor complaints based on the proactive approaches that the city's been taking in trying to address odors on a regular basis. This graphic here basically shows us where we've been active over the course of the last, in 2022, and where we plan to be active with waste disposal in 2023. So basically, our active waste disposal area has been in the northwest corner of the landfill footprint, and that will continue in 2023. There may be an area that we move to sort of in the central portion of the site in 2023 as well. We're currently discussing that with landfill operations staff. And the whole intent is with the landfill expansion, we've identified an area here in the southwest portion of the site where we will be mining the existing waste out of the site. In other words, excavating the waste that's already been disposed of there so that we can install a leachate collection system under that waste. So we want to try and stay out of the southwest quadrant as much as we can to avoid or to minimize the amount of waste that we will actually have to excavate there in the future. This graphic here shows us where our residual capacity lies. So when you see the yellow, basically we've reached the final contour or the final elevation of the waste mound. So obviously a lot of the eastern portion of the site has been filled to capacity. The darker the colors as we get into the purple and the darker blues, that's the area where we have the largest available capacity remaining. You can see the legend on the right-hand side where the purple is. We have more than 15 meters of depth remaining that we can fill. And the darker blues are anywhere from 6 to 15 meters where we can continue to fill. And as we get into the lighter blues, there's obviously some capacity there, but the capacity is a little bit less. And this graphic here highlights where we've applied final cover to the site. So the entire eastern portion, and again, if I go back to the previous slide, we've reached the maximum capacity of the eastern portions where the yellow is, and hence that's the area where we've applied final cover. So final cover has been applied to probably 60% of the site, all concentrated on the eastern portion of the site. And then if we look at the historical waste diversion rate, you can see there was a significant focus was placed on enhancing diversion activities in the early 2000s. We were engaged by the city to do a bunch of planning work related to their waste programs. And at that time, there was a distinct need to enhance diversion. And it paid off in dividends as we increased diversion substantially from, around the 10% mark up to and above 30%. So there was a period in here where we were reporting diversion up sort of in the mid to the mid 30s, where we did identify there were some discrepancies with some of the reporting where it may have been overstated somewhat. That was corrected. And generally speaking, we have been in the 30% range now for 6 or 7 years, which is probably where it should have been back in these years as well, probably closer to the 30% range. We are no longer required to report to Waste Diversion Ontario with our diversion rates. So you'll notice here, the last year we've reported is 2021. We do not have a diversion rate for 2022 because it's no longer a requirement that the city report that, but we anticipate or we expect that it continues to be in that 30% range. And when we look at waste disposal quantities, these are the quantities of waste actually disposed of in the landfill mass. And, there were a time back in the late 90s where we were disposing of in excess of 100,000 tons a year. And as you can see, there's been a steady decline over time. Over the past roughly 5 years, we've generally been in around the 40,000 ton per year mark. And in the last 2 years, we've actually been below that in the 38 and 36,000 ton per year range. Part of the decline from this point here in 2011 through to 2017 relates to the fact that some of our industrial, commercial, and institutional waste is being exported into a northern Michigan landfill. So there was a time where we were accepting about 25,000 tons of commercial waste or business waste at the landfill back, like I say, in the 2011 era. And now we're receiving about 6,000 tons of waste. So a lot of this decline in waste is related to the ICI waste. And then if we look at waste received at the landfill, we've just got two pie charts here, one showing 2021 and one showing 2022 down in the right. Just to be able to contrast, you can see that generally speaking, the types of waste or the total, so what we received in 2021 was 112,000 tons of waste at the landfill. What we actually landfilled in that year was about 38,000 tons. And the reason there's such a big disparity to, from what we received to what we landfilled is because we received a significant amount of surplus construction materials. And those construction materials are largely aggregates, old aggregates and soil materials. And we actually use those materials for cover. So they don't actually factor into our landfilled waste quantity. And similarly, in 2022, we did receive 84,000 tons of waste, and we ended up landfilling about 36,000 tons. So we did see a large proportion, again, of surplus materials received from construction projects, not quite as high as we saw in 2021, but still a fairly significant amount of waste construction materials that again are being used for cover material. And you'll see waste diverted, that small piece of the pie is basically those diversion activities that we went through earlier that don't find their way into the landfill mass, but actually are leaving the site and being distributed elsewhere. So when we look at that small piece, the 2% that we talked about, the diversion quantity, again, the quantities when we compare 2021 up in the right top right here compared to 2022 in the bottom left here, the numbers are quite similar, just over 2,000 tons in both years. And you'll see that we've basically showed the different types of materials that are being diverted from the landfill, the biggest one being yard waste. So it makes up almost 70% of the diverted waste. The other big one is metals, making up about 20% of the diverted waste. Then we have cardboard material, tires, etc. So that is the makeup of the diverted waste, and it does seem to be fairly consistent year over year, typically. And then when we look at the landfilled waste type, again, this is the waste that actually gets disposed of in our landfill mass. As I mentioned, in 2021, we had about 38,000 tons. In 2022, we had about 37,000 tons, so fairly similar, a slight drop in 2022. If we look at the major components of that, it makes, we have about 16% is commercial waste. The lion's share is residential waste, primarily coming out of our curbside program, as well as the residential waste that gets deposited at the public drop-off, but it makes up about 42% of our waste. We have shingles here. We have sewage sludge is a major component. And then we have, well, this is the general public drop-off here. Sorry, that's a separate item. So it makes up about 13%. You can see it's fairly consistent year over year. So those are the major components when we look at the waste that is being deposited in the landfill. And residual waste disposal capacity, we do compute it and report on it on an annual basis. It will fluctuate year to year for various reasons. One reason is that our landfill mass has up to 30 meters of waste depth in it. So what will happen over time is some of the underlying waste will settle and will degrade over time. So you will see settlement occurring, and we may actually generate additional disposal capacity as that waste settles over time. It will depend on how interim and contaminated soils are managed within disposal footprint, and it will depend on waste types and disposal rates. So what we've estimated at the end of 2022, as Peter indicated, we have approximately 5 years of residual site life left. When we compare that to what we reported at the end of 2021, we reported 5.3 years of residual capacity. So despite operating the site for 1 year, what we're saying is we only used up 0.3 years of capacity. And again, the reason for that is we don't complete a full survey of the site every year. So we are using maybe a survey that is a little dated, and we are adding to it the waste that has come into the site based on the quantities that come across the waste scales. And in other cases, we may actually, when we do our survey, we may find that areas where we thought we no longer had waste disposal capacity, there may be some additional capacity that comes online because of settlement of those wastes. So again, going from 2021 to 2022, we're basically reporting that we've used up 0.3 years of capacity. So the waste EA, for those that are new, the blue represents the existing disposal footprint that we currently have. The green is showing the new disposal area that we're looking to get approved through the environmental assessment process to give us an additional capacity of approximately 20 years of additional capacity. And we're currently working on the final touches of the documentation for the environmental assessment. And we will be submitting that in the near term to the Ministry of the Environment. And then before I turn it over to Rob to talk about the monitoring report, again, just to re-highlight what we do in terms of managing potentially contaminated groundwater that may be generated from the waste mound. We have a collector, which is a horizontal collector, and it operates much like a French drain along the south and southeast portion of the site. So as groundwater flows towards the south and southeast, it enters this subsurface collector, and it then flows by gravity to our pump station that is on site. And then on the western side of the site, we have a series of 11 purge wells that operate continuously, that collect groundwater and send it to our pump station that's on site. And then that leachate that makes its way to the pump station is then pumped to the West End Sewage Treatment Plant, where it gets treated. And in 2022, we averaged 13.9 liters a second over the course of the year continuously, or 439,000 cubic meters of leachate was collected and sent to treatment at the West End Sewage Treatment Plant. And our permit to take water at the site was reissued, or the new permit to take water that was issued in 2021 allows us to withdraw up to 19 liters a second. And as I said, we basically collected about 14 liters a second. So with that, maybe Peter, I'll just open it up to any questions related to site operations before I turn it over to Rob Kell related to the monitoring side of things.
Are there any questions there? Don't hesitate. My apologies to the new members that I was forgetting there's a long learning curve on the background. I thank Rick for bringing that up and doing that first, because there's so much data. One thing I note though is that when I got involved 20 years ago, I guess, the life expectancy was only 10 years, and we still have a 5-year. So the work that we're doing is actually extending the life and delaying the expansion. But eventually we're going to have to answer to reality. Any questions from the members? Feel free to jump in. Okay, Rick, you want to introduce Rob then again?
Yep. So Rob Kell, as I mentioned, Rob is with Dillon Consulting. They've been actively involved with the site monitoring, dating back. Actually, they were involved when the city initially took over this landfill site from Cherokee Disposals back in the late 80s. So Rob has a long operating history, or a very extensive knowledge of the groundwater and surface water patterns at this site. And so he's been reporting on it for over 30 years. So Rob, over to you.
Okay. So thank you. Our first few slides are going to be talking about how we assess our water quality. So there are repeats from before, but with the number of new members, it's important for us just to get a little bit of a basis on how we assess our groundwater quality. And our first kind of definition would be called reasonable use, and that is developed by the Ministry of the Environment. And what it is that it is a measure of how you can discharge from neighbor property, but it has to be no more than a negligible or trivial effect. And for the case of the Sault Ste. Marie landfill, our reasonable use of water is groundwater. But if you go to the next slide, please, Rick, or who's ever running the show. This is kind of a graphic. So So there are drinking water standards, but to establish a trivial effect, what's been established is that we cannot degrade water quality. Only 25% of the difference between our background and the drinking water standard for health-related parameters. For aesthetic parameters such as chloride, you're allowed to have 50%. So it's not that we can degrade water quality up to the standards. We're only allowed a proportion of that. And there's a graphic there that assesses it. So we have a background water quality. For health-related parameters, it's only 25% of an increase, and for the aesthetic, it's 50%. So when I refer to the reasonable use and the standards developed from that, it's only a percentage of the drinking water standard. Next slide. So over the years, the first monitoring wells were installed at this site in the early 80s, back when it was Cherokee, but there's been what we call monitors or monitoring wells. I'll use the term interchangeably, but over the years, there's been over 200. About 98 of them are still in good condition, and we record water levels in them. We take our program requires us to take samples from 40 of the monitoring wells. These monitoring wells are included to be sampled because of their location, and some wells are nearby each other, so we only sample the one well. So there's 40 active monitoring wells where we take samples from. And then we also take a sample of the leachate or leachate contaminated groundwater that we collect. And so there's, in terms of our monitoring wells, there's basically, we try to establish background wells, or that wells that are located what we call up gradient or away from landfill effects. We have landfills near we have monitoring wells near the landfill mass itself, and we call them source. And then our monitoring wells themselves are located along the groundwater flow pathways away from the fill area. Next slide. So what do we monitor and how often? I mentioned this previously, but we take water levels from all existing accessible wells. Water levels allow us to track how groundwater moves on the site. So similarly to, the topography and surface water that goes downhill, our water levels in our wells are used to assess where groundwater is moving, and it basically moves from areas of high groundwater to areas of low groundwater. And I have some graphics later on that show the movement. Our quality, where we send, city staff take water samples from the wells. They get sent off to a laboratory. We get our results back, and we compare them to the reasonable use criteria. The target parameter list that we do is, it's a general chemistry, and major and minor ions are used more or less to assess groundwater quality trends and impacts. But we also look for trace metals and volatile organics in the groundwater samples. We also do surface water samples, by the way, but that's coming up, if you will. In terms of how we assess if the water quality is being significantly impacted with leachate, what we key on are chloride and alkalinity, electrical conductivity, and total organic carbon. We sample some wells 3 times a year, depending on their location. Some wells are 2 times a year, and I think there's also another class where it's only once a year. We collect leachate samples from the pump station. We analyze that 4 times a year. So here's a graphic of the site, and I'll just spend a little bit of a moment on how groundwater flows and how we collect leachate at the site to prevent off-site migration. So first of all, I talked a little bit about, we use the term leachate, and I just used the term leachate impacted groundwater. All the fill on this site lies above the water table. So, rainwater that gets through the final cover or in our active areas, it percolates down through the waste and into natural soil underneath the landfill, and it mixes with the groundwater there. So what we collect on this site is actually groundwater that's been impacted with leachate, and therefore that's why we have a permit to take water limit to how we do these things. But anyway, there's two components of groundwater flow at this site, and it all has to do with topography and the effects of the Root River and the non-effect as you move further away to the west. So as Rick mentioned, on the south and east side, we have the Root River and Cannon Creek. Cannon Creek is on the north, and it curls around and comes down the east side. And of course, the Root River is a bit further to the east, but and in that area, we established this horizontal collector system. We have topography working for us. The water table is fairly shallow in that area. And so it allowed us to put in a horizontal collector system. The southern leg of that was installed in the in the early 90s. And then it was extended up along the alignment of the former Cannon Creek, and to collect leachate and protect Cannon Creek there. South of that collector, if you're familiar with the area, is what we call the meander area. It's a bit more low-lying. And, that's the area that back in the 80s, that's where it was impacted the most at this landfill site. We also have to remember that the landfill was filled east to west, so we really didn't have waste soils on the west side of the site at all. So back in the 80s, all of the impacts were occurring in the meander area beside the Root River. Our collector system that was installed back in the 90s and extended in the 2000s has really protected that area. As we move off to the west, we have a component of groundwater flow that's not influenced by the Root River and surface water, and it flows kind of in a south and west direction. And the topography is such there that the water table is quite deep. So the way we collect impacted groundwater there is we have a series of these purge wells. There's 11 active ones, and they collect groundwater basically right at the water table surface. So the geology in that area is mainly sand. It does kind of grade back and forth, and it's a bit more coarse at the water table and a few meters below it. And so all of the leachate impacted groundwater wants to flow in that kind of shallow zone, even though it's 60 feet deep. It's the zone of saturated because of the deep water table. And so we try to kind of skim, if you will, the impacted groundwater there, because we don't want to put in deep wells that would mix it up and cause like a deep migration of groundwater. So this system has been in place since probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we started to install it. We started to see impacts. We knew that even if you go back to the reports in the early 80s, we knew that once the landfill expanded to the west, that we were going to have a westerly component of flow. So this was the impacts flowing to the west was expected to occur, and these purge wells were expected to be needed at that time. And so they intercept the leachate impacted groundwater as it moves towards the south and west. Maybe next slide. So the next few slides have a lot of words. They're from the monitoring report, but it's just what we have done in terms of this in discussion on our monitoring results. We've kind of divided it into those two different zones. As I said, on the east and southerly boundary, we have good control of leachate impacts. certainly after the extension of the leachate collection system to protect Cannon Creek in the I think it was 2006, if I can remember. So it's been in place for a while. We've seen really good improvement in terms of surface water quality, which I will get to, but as well as groundwater quality. We did install a new well, basically right in the corner of where Cannon Creek, just upstream of where Cannon Creek enters the Root River. We had issues with a previous well there that was installed on the landfill side of the collector, and it was, of course, having some impacts. But we found a location where we could install a well that's in between Cannon Creek and our collector system, and it will be very valuable in terms of providing some really current data on anything that could be getting beyond our collector, but before it enters Cannon Creek. I think I'll move on. And so on the western side, we have a number of active wells there. In the northern part, I talk about 71 and monitoring well 71 and 73. They're to the north and they reflect background quality. We have impacts in this area as groundwater flows beyond our purge well system. And these impacts have resulted in a very narrow plume. I have a graphic, I think, in the next slide that shows it, but there's a very narrow groundwater plume that's been in existence now for, going on 20 years. The impacts there, they tend to go, they do fluctuate in terms of the the amount of, in particular, chloride, which is a nice tracer for this site. When you take away, when you have the benefit of hindsight and look at the 20 years of data in totality, there hasn't been any kind of worsening of conditions on this site. But we still have this narrow plume that somewhat terminates around the hydro corridor. Maybe the next slide would be a good one to show. So these are those dark lines. They're what we call equipotential lines, or lines of equal concentrations. And you can see that we have this narrow plume that's centered on monitoring well 65 in this case. Also on this graphic, you'll see that the number of purge wells, we put in a new purge well in May 2022 of last year. The intent of that one was to provide a little bit of redundancy. These purge wells tend to clog and have maintenance issues, so we wanted to have one ready to go. When we installed it last year, it produced a lot of water, and in particular in this area, where you can see that some concentration of some purge wells, our flow rates were never really great. And the well that we installed last year was on the better side of what we typically get there. So a decision was made to make that operational immediately, and has been operational since. Groundwater moves at the site in that southwesterly direction about 200 meters a year. So the travel time from the purge wells down to that hydro corridor is around 2 years, 3 years. So we're not expecting to see immediate benefits from that. But, it's been operational now for a year. This particular year, not wanting to get to the end of the story quickly, but our water quality in this plume area is on the better side of what, I've told you before, how it fluctuates. 2022 data, it's actually on some of the better numbers happened last year. Again, it does fluctuate. I'm not expecting the problem to go away, or it's the start of a trend, but it will be interesting in the next couple of years to see the effect of that additional purge well. So the biggest conclusion we have here is that the purge well is effective. It certainly is controlling it. We're not seeing a continuous degradation of water quality that's getting further and further away from the landfill, but it does have some limitations.
Rob, can you pause there for a second?
Sure.
Any questions from the members? I know some of this is going to be overwhelming. I have one question, Rob.
Sure.
A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And I'm looking on the west boundary there, well,
Yeah.
76, 77, 78.
Yeah.
The number below 8.05, what is that indicating?
Okay, so that's a concentration of chloride. So you're looking at 8 milligrams per liter, 0.3 milligrams per liter, and 0.3 milligrams per liter. But if you move closer in that area, you'll see things like 250, 350. So you can see that there's a much higher concentration at the hydro corridor. We have some wells that are installed, west of that property boundary there. And it really is an effective boundary. Like those wells really do define that the plume is not getting any worse in that southwesterly direction.
Okay, that's a good point. That's what I wanted to
Yes.
highlight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Any other questions? Carry on then, Rob. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, and that was a very logical place for questions because I'd like to talk about surface water quality now. So we sample at 5 times a year in January, May, June, August, and October. We take samples both from Cannon Creek and the Root River. We have 5 active locations. Some of these are historical locations. If you're kind of counting the number of yellow asterisks, they're more than 5, but the active ones are listed there. And we had our compliance boundary from the ministry is actually at S5. So it's in the Root River just before it exits the site. But we sample other locations just to see water quality trends as surface water kind of moves around the landfill. And the criteria that we compare to, it's not reasonable use, it's what's called the provincial water quality objectives. And they've been established by the province as objectives of establishing levels that should not be exceeded in natural surface water. We can go to the next slide. And again, I apologize for all the words on this one, but the parameter that we key on mostly or can cause the most effects, if you will, from landfill leachate, and especially from older landfills, is ammonia. Ammonia is toxic to fish in very small quantities. And the form of ammonia that causes the most concern is what's called unionized ammonia. And unionized ammonia is dependent not only on the total ammonia concentration, but also on pH and temperature. And so in the last couple of years, we've had problems with measuring our pH in the field. We have a meter that's taken. We like to use field pH measurements just because they don't sit in bottles for very long, but we do also use lab pH. And so when we send the water off to the lab, they will take a pH. So this year we're going to pay particular attention to calibration of the field meter and make sure that we get good data. But when we use the lab pH, our unionized ammonia concentrations are typical of history and also don't have any exceedances. I mentioned before that we extended the leachate collection system kind of northeasterly to protect Cannon Creek. At that time, the Cannon Creek historically was right at the foot of the landfill. So the channel was realigned, and so Cannon Creek was moved further to the east, away from the foot of landfill. But when we did that, we also extended the leachate collection system, and our concentrations in Cannon Creek and our concerns there have noticeably been much better since that time. And if you were familiar with the landfill, 15 years ago, Cannon Creek at that time had a lot of iron staining and what have you, and that has dissipated since that time. So again, we feel that we've got good control of what's getting into Cannon Creek and in the Root River. Root River is such a big river that you know, it has a large flow from upstream. Cannon Creek is a much smaller one and therefore would have bigger impacts from the landfill. Moving on. So the other component of what we monitor out there is landfill gas. So we collect gas and we flare it as Rick described, but we also measure landfill gas in the subsurface. Certainly we don't get migration of landfill gas off the landfill proper, but we do get it near landfill infrastructure. And so in terms of in particular protection of workers inside buildings, but beyond that too, we had monitor landfill gas. There's one area right near the household hazardous waste, those administration buildings, where outside we have high gas levels. For probably now, you know, again, about 15 years, the levels aren't getting any worse, but in particularly since that time, we have what I would call elaborate monitoring within the buildings themselves. The electrical system is tied into an alarm system that is tied into gas detection systems. And we don't have migration into the buildings. And if we do, we have fail safes that would cut off power and provide additional safety. So the landfill gas concentrations have been very, they haven't been getting any worse. They have been concentrated outside, as I say, some of the buildings on site. But we feel that we have it under control in terms of it not getting into areas that would be unacceptable. And things like our manholes for leachate collection systems are very similar, quite frankly, to sewage collection manholes. You're always concerned about air quality there in terms of entry and other things. So the landfill gas situation has been kind of under control now for a number of years. So this more or less just says what I've said. So, you know, so I've said that the detection and mitigation has been in the building since 2009, so for 14 years now. So our recommendations, we haven't received formal review comments from the ministry for about 8 years, but they're sent our reports every year as part of the conditions for the certificate of approval, or it's actually called an ECA, environmental compliance approval, is the new lingo for that. So our conclusions, we put in our new monitoring well, which was recommended 2 years ago. So it was installed in December, and it will provide some good data, as I say, that's between our collection system and Cannon Creek. Our purge well issues and operational issues, you know, they've been operating now close to 20 years. We have a very kind of our standard operating procedures for these purge wells. We know they're clogged. We know we have preventative maintenance on them that usually occurs in the spring of each year. You know, we keep them operating because, you know, in terms of our past experience with them, we know the amount of inspection and maintenance that's required there. Certainly our third bullet, we have, you know, levels of methane gas that are explosive within ground. Again, they're not in buildings, measured in buildings, but in ground near the buildings. And so that continues to be an area of vigilance. And it has been, as I say, for at least 10 years. And I think that might be it, Rick. I don't know if there's one beyond that too. No,
Okay.
it's not.
No, that's it.
So
Can we pause there for comments? I know for the new members of the committee, it's probably overwhelming when you have homework to read a report that's 970 some odd pages long. But I do thank you for the digital copy, Rick and Rob, that basically a lot of the questions you may have historically are recorded there and you can refer to them for future reference. Can you bring up page 15 of the report?
Of the report itself?
Yeah, just as an example. And I thank you both for putting that well 79 in, that the committee did have at least one voice was very strong in getting that well, and I'm glad to see it's there now.
I'm going to see if I can bring that up quickly or not, Peter. I think I can. Only because it's coming from our server, it's a little bit, and such a big report. Just let me see how quickly I can bring that up.
Okay, while you're doing that, the report has lots of tables with numbers, and it's, for most of us, it's too much to handle. But anytime there's a graph, the graph speaks volumes. So I'm using page 15 as an example. While you're doing that, one of the things I had noted in my comments here was the pH surface level, and I had some questions about it, but I see that Rob also has similar questions, so that we'll wait for the next one to see how the pH numbers come on the surface water.
Yeah, Peter, I can. It's my computer's doing a little spin routine here because it's such a big file. But you may, if you want, you could see if there's other questions, or alternatively move on to some other agenda items, and I can bring this up as quickly as I can. But it looks like it may take a little bit of time here.
So Rick, I have it on my screen.
Okay.
So if you give me control, maybe I could do it.
Yeah, I can stop sharing here. And I think you can see at the bottom there, Rob, there's a share screen option.
Share screen.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So this is page 15 of the report. Is that the one you wanted, Peter?
Okay, it may have been in Rick's report. I didn't know which one of the files I was.
Okay.
Okay, it's not critical.
Okay.
The other one that I had is 609 to 619.
Oh, of the big report. Okay.
Of your report.
Okay. I have a truncated version just to avoid the problems that Rick has. So if you just would bear with me. It's a massive report.
But it makes it easy for future years. Can you just keep on adding to this one? Because I see you have the ground well analysis for each of the wells as well.
Okay, so it just
while you're finding that. The other things I'd noted here, a lot of construction going on right now, and I see piles of stumps. What happens to those stumps?
Mike, is Mike there?
Yeah, can you hear me, Peter?
Oh, maybe Mike can answer that. Do the stumps end up at landfill?
Yeah, we have a certain area at the landfill that we take stumps, and we have future plans to grind them. But the reason we separate them out is because right now they can't be ground by our contractor Anson because they're too big. And we can't put them in the landfill because it just destroys the equipment there. So we have a separate place for stumps right now with plans to grind them and possibly use them as a feedstock in our biosolids plant.
Okay, now that was my suspicion, but there was nothing in the report on that. With all the demolitions going on, we've had 2 high schools. There's supposed to be source separating there. The brick and the concrete, is that used as cover?
No, we generally don't accept brick and concrete at the landfill.
So what happens to that then?
I think that it's recycled. There are some contractors around town that recycle them, and but we don't accept that at the landfill.
Okay. Another item that's listed in there is the asbestos, and the amounts that were shown on the table there. I'm guessing those are in tons. But you say you accept it in bags. That sounds like an awful lot of bags.
Generally, we get it in say 40-yard trucks. So it's one large bag. We only accept small bags for small jobs, sometimes from the public, but generally it becomes in one large container that's bagged.
Okay, because I was noticing one month there was 4 tons of it coming in. That's a heck of a lot of asbestos.
That could have been a construction or demolition around town.
Yeah. Okay.
So Peter, I have the bigger report on my screen now, hopefully
Yeah.
on your screen too, if you wanted to tell me what page you wanted to have brought up.
So I'm just using this as an example of how there's a lot of data in the tables and stuff, but if you see a graph like that, immediately say, oh, we got red, 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 and then it jumps way up again. And as I interpret that one, that was a well that was being replaced, and the new well is giving you different results.
Yeah, so that's the one that was, the new well was installed too close to the leachate collection system. And so in that particular area of the landfill, there was access issues. And so this, we've classified this as being indicative of leachate source, but we've installed another well called 79 that's located between this location and Cannon Creek. And so it's going to give us a good indication of the quality of water beyond our collector system. This one's basically right beside it. So that the new well is going to give us some great data to allow us to get water quality more representative of what's getting into Cannon Creek. So.
Okay, now I asked for this one to be put up for the benefit of the new members, because this is, as a layman reading the reports, and I glance and I say, whoa, what happened there? Where some of the stuff is covered in the summaries, and some of it's covered in tables and stuff, but a graph like that, suddenly it catches your attention, and it expands the rationale then for putting that well 79.
It's a very good example.
Okay, so thank you, Rob. If there are no questions. So Rob, if no questions, thank you again for your report and staying with us. And we'll talk to you again in another year.
Okay, thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thanks, Rob and Rick, for presenting the reports.
So anything else on the agenda?
We have our standing item of voter control, and there have been no complaints for 2023. So there's limited there, but I know Rick's report did speak to odor control measures, so I don't think I have anything additional to add at this time.
Okay, any of the members have questions or comments? Our next potential meeting would be in the fall.
Yeah, I think we're monitoring just to see if there's any other particular items that we can report on. But I think that the fall would probably be a good time for next one.
Sorry, Peter, can I just add one thing? Just as a
Yes.
reminder to everyone. Just a reminder that 2023 is a transition year for blue box collection on curbside. So we're talking about the next meeting already, but September 30th of this year is the transition date there for curbside recycling. So that's a significant thing for the city. And we don't expect that there will be any changes to the way curbside recycling is collected. But GFL will be continuing collecting, but the city is no longer responsible for curbside collection.
So would early September be a good time for a meeting so that we have a heads up as to what's happening, and then the city can, because it'll probably make the headlines and everybody will say what's happening, that we can have some kind of promotion ahead, heads up warning.
Yeah, we can schedule something for around that time for sure.
Okay. Another issue that was in the paper on Saturday, and Rick mentioned it briefly there, is the purchase of the lands on Fifth Line there, and I'm assuming they're the ones just to the left of the, or just to the west of the current area,
Correct.
and that there's one more still to be settled through expropriation.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, but since those are property matters, they don't reach the public until the decision's actually made.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if there are no other questions or comments, thank you to the new members. And I know myself, it took me 4 or 5 years to figure out what was actually going on and what all the numbers meant and the boundary criteria. And even C of A is now called an ECA, I think. Or is it ECA? Is that the new one?
Yes.
Environmental Certificate of Previously. And the MECP is the MEPPC or something.
MECP.
It's very hard to keep up with them. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks, Peter, for chairing again. And we'll send out a notice for the next meeting in due course.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.
You're welcome.